Runeterra is a world built on the ruins of dead empires and sleeping gods, and almost every region of it hides something that would happily unmake you. This is a full accounting of the monsters that live in that world, the creatures pulled out of the void, the demons that feed on human feeling, the fallen god warriors locked inside their own weapons, the undead that drift through grey mist, and the drowned things that wait beneath the sea. Runeterra holds hundreds of named champions, and a surprising number of them are not people at all. They are predators, revenants, and hungers given a shape. What follows moves through each family of monster in turn, tracing where they came from, what they want, and why the mortals of this world have learned to fear the dark. But first, let's close our eyes and hit the subscribe button. Just kidding, you can open your eyes, but you still have to hit that subscribe button. The oldest horror of them all was never born on Runeterra. It came from the void, and the void is not really a place so much as an absence, a realm of perfect nothingness that existed long before the physical world did. In that first silence there was no hunger and no fear, only stillness. The trouble began when reality itself came into being. The birth of a new dimension broke the calm, and entities that had known only emptiness were forced, all at once, into shape and self and separation. They lashed out against the shock of simply existing, and everything they touched, they erased. Mortals who came later gave these creatures and their empty domain a single name, the Void, because a void was all they left behind. The first of these beings, the Voidborn, carried one desire beneath all others, the wish to consume every scrap of reality and return the world to the flawless quiet they had lost. For most of history, the Void stayed sealed away from the living lands, held back by the thinness of the barrier between worlds. That changed in the ancient south, in a province of the Shuraman Empire called Icathia. The Icathians had been conquered and humiliated, and when they rose in rebellion, they reached for a weapon no one had dared to touch. They tore open a doorway into the void and tried to bend its power to their cause. What poured through could not be controlled by anyone. The rift swallowed Icathia whole, turned a proud city into a wound in the world, and the empire had to send its greatest god warriors to drive the tide back before it consumed everything. They succeeded, barely. But the doorway was never fully closed, and the memory of that hunger has been leaking into Runeterra ever since. The way Icathia fell deserves a closer look, because the whole tragedy grew out of wounded pride rather than evil. Icathia had once been its own proud mage kingdom before Shurima conquered it and cast down its mage king. And for generations afterward, its people were treated as second-class subjects, their customs suppressed, and their names quietly erased. Again and again, the Icathian Council petitioned the Shuraman Emperor, asking only that some of their own citizens be raised through ascension, so that Icathia might have a voice in the empire. Every petition was denied without so much as a reason given. A learned Icathian named Zilean travelled to the neighbouring kingdoms as an envoy, seeking allies for a bid at independence. And every one of them turned him away out of fear of Shurima and its god warriors. Cornered and desperate, Icathia rebelled anyway. The turning point came when an earthquake near a place called Sabera cracked the earth and exposed something buried far below, a rift that bled into the void. Icathian mages carried that dark power back toward their capital, barely contained inside conjured braziers of elemental fire, and laid it before their leaders as a weapon. In response, Shurima marched an enormous army south, led by 10 of its mightiest god warriors, among them the warlord Sataka and the winged Aatrox. As the two forces met at the rebuilt walls of the city, the Icathian mages unleashed the void directly onto the battlefield. The bright desert sky turned the colour of a fresh bruise. An abyss tore open in the middle of the Shuraman host, and Sateka was seized almost instantly by writhing cords of living matter and dragged under before she could break free. Within moments, the mages had lost all control of what they had summoned, and the towers of Icathia began to buckle as the rift widened to swallow everything. One veteran warrior named Syjax survived the ruin, and rather than fall on his sword, he snatched up a still, burning brazier stave, whose fire scorched the void, and he fled his dying homeland, abandoning his old name to become known ever after simply as Jax. Another survivor, Zelian, could not save his city, so he lifted his own tower out of time itself, freezing everyone he could shelter inside it in an eternal instant while he wandered on beyond the reach of years, still searching for a way to undo the day Icathia died. The creatures that crawl out of that wound take many forms, and the most famous of them is Cho'Gath. Cho'Gath is appetite made flesh, a towering horror that grows larger with every living thing it devours. It feels no cruelty and no malice, only an endless, tightening emptiness that eating never quite fills, and the more it consumes, the more it needs. To stand near Cho'Gath is to understand the void in its simplest form, a mouth that widens forever and is never satisfied. Where Cho'Gath is bulk and appetite, Kog'Maw is something stranger and almost pitiable. Known as the mouth of the abyss, Kog'Maw came through the barrier with a childlike curiosity, and it explores the world the way a toddler might, by putting everything into its mouth. The problem is that its saliva burns through stone and steel, and its body leaks a caustic slime that kills whatever it touches. It leaves ruin in its wake, without ever meaning harm. A small and eager creature wrecking the world simply by trying to taste it. Kha'Zix took a different path entirely. This voidborn hunter evolves as it kills, reshaping its own body to overcome whatever prey proves difficult, growing sharper and deadlier with each hunt. Its long rivalry with the beast hunter Rengar has become a legend of the wilds, the two of them circling each other across seasons, each one obsessed with the single opponent that got away. Kha'Zix embodies the void as a predator that improves without limit, always adapting, always hungry for the next challenge that might make it stronger. Beneath the sands of Shurima moves Rek'Sai, the void burrower, an enormous armoured creature that tunnels through solid earth as though it were water. Rek'Sai hunts by sensing vibration and movement through the ground, dragging travellers down into the dark before they ever see what took them. Whole caravans have vanished in the deep desert, and the survivors speak of a rumble under their feet, and then nothing at all. Rek'Sai and her kind, the Zersai, form something close to a colony, one of the few void creatures that lives and breeds in numbers rather than as a lone terror. In the deep desert canyon of Saikar-Leek, she is doing something more alarming than hunting. She is enlarging a void rift there, widening one of the wounds in the world from below, turning a stretch of Shuriman wasteland into a growing nest for her brood, which makes her not just a predator, but a slow engine of the void's expansion. It is no accident that so many of these horrors share the same broken-sounding names and the same homeland. Cho'Gath, Kog'Maw, Kha'Zix, Rek'Sai, Vel'Koz, the very shape of those names, split by a hard stop in the middle, marks them as things of the void and the deep Shuriman south where it first poured through. Shurima is the void's heartland on the surface world, the place where Icathia fell and where the wound has never truly healed, and centuries after the rupture the desert is still riddled with corrupted caves and hidden rifts. Whole tribes have learned to read the ground for the faint tremor that means a Cersei is rising, and the deep south of the continent is treated by the wise as one enormous, unmarked grave. Everywhere else the void is an intrusion. In Shurima it is practically a native. Then there is Vel'Koz, and Vel'Koz is the coldest of them all. This creature does not simply destroy, it studies. Vel'Koz observes the world with detached fascination, and its method of understanding a thing is to take that thing apart, to disintegrate it slowly and record what it learns from the unmaking. It treats a living person the way a scholar treats a specimen, and there is no anger in it, only a patient, ruthless curiosity. Vel'Koz represents the Void's intellect, the horror not of blind hunger, but of a mind that wants to know exactly how you come apart. For a long time, these creatures seemed to be the whole of the Void's threat, individual monsters seeping through cracks. The truth turned out to be far worse. Over untold ages, the Void changed, fed by every war the surface world fought, and by the ancient conflict at the northern edge of the map, and it began to crave something it had never wanted before: a leader. It wanted a mind that could speak to mortals, harvest their memories, and give the Void a purpose beyond mindless erasure. That leader is Bel'Veth, and her birth is the most disturbing story the Void has produced. Bel'Veth needed raw material to come into being, and she found it in a Shuriman port city that also happened to be called Bel'Veth. Working through her chosen prophet, a man named Malzahar, the Void opened an enormous rift beneath the city and pulled the whole of it under: buildings, harbour, ocean, and every living soul. The Void consumed the collective memories, experiences, and emotions of that entire population, and from all of it a new empress took shape. She named herself after the city she had eaten, a thing Voidborn were never supposed to be able to do, and her mind now holds millions of years of perfectly preserved knowledge, giving her something close to omniscience. She usually wears the calm face of a middle-aged woman with grey skin and a third eye, and only when she is displeased does she unfurl titanic wings and reveal the monstrous shape beneath. Bel'Veth intends to consume all of Runeterra and rebuild it as a realm of her own design, a vast alien ocean she calls the Lavender Sea, and she has set her sights even on the ancient masters of the Void itself. Of the world she plans to erase, she says only that she will replace it, a child devouring its parent. What makes Bel'Veth genuinely new among Void horrors is the shape of her ambition. The older Voidborn and the ancient masters who made her want one thing above all: to unmake creation and drag everything back into perfect nothingness. Bel'Veth does not. She wants to devour the world and then rebuild it, to remake all of reality in her own image as an endless alien ocean rather than simply erase it. That single difference sets her against her own creators, because a Void that plans to keep existing in a new form is a heresy to a Void that only wants to end. She looks on the Watchers as failed parents who never grasped the potential she can see, and her contempt for them runs so deep that she is willing to strike bargains with mortal enemies, even with humanity itself, if it helps her destroy the old masters before they can drag her remade world back into the dark. It is a strange thing to find in a monster born to consume, a kind of vision, and it may make her more dangerous than any hunger that came before, because Bel'Veth does not merely want to eat the world. She has a plan for what comes after. Malzahar deserves his own moment here, because he shows what the Void does to the humans it touches. Once an ordinary Shuriman, Malzahar began hearing the whispers of the Void as visions, and he came to believe he was its prophet, sent to prepare the world for a coming age of nothingness. He opens rifts and gathers followers, convinced he is offering mercy rather than annihilation, and he became the instrument through which Bel'Veth entered the world. He is not a monster in body, but he is one of the Void's most useful weapons, a true believer spreading its gospel among people who cannot yet see what waits behind his eyes. It was Malzahar who fed hundreds of living souls into the dark to nourish the thing that would become Bel'Veth, delivering victim after victim to the rift in the belief that he was midwifing salvation rather than an empress of ruin. He alone claims to have travelled to the buried ruins of Icathia, drawn there by a voice only he could hear. And everything he has done since flows from his certainty that the coming of the void is a mercy the rest of the world is too frightened to accept. Not everyone the void touches becomes its servant. Kassadin walked into the void deliberately, and to understand why, you have to know what it took from him first. He began life as a lowly outcast in the great desert of Shurima, hired as living bait to lure predators away from merchant caravans. And against every expectation he survived trek after trek, until his knowledge of the sands made him a guide instead of a lure. He earned his name from a foreign phrase meaning, "Whom does the desert know?" In time he fell in love with a woman of the desert tribes, and he settled with her and their newborn daughter in a small village among the southern canyons. Then one day, returning home from a distant journey, he met terrified survivors staggering out of the dunes with stories of the earth opening to devour their homes. He rode until his mount nearly died, and when he reached the place his village had stood, he found only sand and rubble, and he clawed at the debris until his hands bled. The void had taken his family and his home the same way it had taken Icathia. Broken by grief and then hardened by purpose, Kassadin resolved to hunt the horror in its own domain, arming himself with the strangest weapons in the world, fusing Zaunite technology with Ionian spirit blessings, and stealing the nether blade of an ancient ascended who had fought the void long before him. To survive the journey into the rift, he did the one thing no one is supposed to walk away from. He let the void inside his own body, and somehow held onto his mind, emerging changed and blue-skinned and slowly corrupting, but still himself. His journey cost him more than he knew, because it changed his daughter. Kaisar was still a girl when the void took her, dragged into the dark and left to survive in a place that kills everything living. She should have died. Instead, she endured, and a living void creature wrapped itself around her body as a second skin, a symbiote suit that keeps her alive and gives her terrible power. Kaisar now walks the line between two worlds, human in heart, but void touched in flesh, hunting the creatures of the deep even as she fears becoming one of them. When she finally faced Belveth, the Empress did not kill her, and instead offered a bargain, telling Kaisar to seek out the old masters of the void and destroy them, buying herself a little more time in a world that Belveth has already decided is doomed. There is one more void creature worth naming, and any player of the game knows it well, even if its lore stays thin. Baron Nashor is a colossal void serpent that nests in the heart of contested ground, a monster so dangerous that armies fight over the chance to kill it and claim its power. It is a reminder that the void does not only produce clever empresses and patient scholars. Sometimes it simply grows a gigantic, screaming worm and lets it loose in the middle of everything. The void left a scar on the surface world that runs deeper than any tunnel, and its worst legacy is a family of monsters that began as heroes. To find them, you have to look at ancient Shurima at the height of its glory, when the Empire crowned its greatest champions through a ritual called Ascension. Chosen mortals, usually near the end of their lives, were raised beneath the sun disk and remade into towering god warriors, immortal and radiant, blessed with the power of the sun itself. People called them the Sunborn, and the two brothers Nasus and Renekton stand among the most famous of them, jackal-headed and crocodile-headed guardians who kept their honor when so many others lost it. For centuries the Ascended were Shurima's shield, and their proudest hour came when Icathia tore open the void. When they finally halted that alien tide, the survivors took the name Sunborn to mark themselves as the first witnesses of a new dawn. Warriors who believed they had bought the world a lasting peace. They could not have known that the peace was a lie. or that the very war that earned them the title had already planted the rot that would turn the greatest of them into the worst monsters Shurima ever produced. The Ascended answered that call and fought the void back at Icathia, and the fighting lasted years. They won, but victory hollowed them out. Every one of them lost a piece of themselves to the thing they had faced, and none of them came home the same. Aatrox, who had led armies with wings that shone like dawn, lost his wings and much of his mind in that war, and the trauma of staring into the void's hunger never left him. Then the Empire itself collapsed. When the Emperor Azir died and Shurima fell to ruin, the Ascended were left with no ruler, no war to fight, and no purpose to hold them together. Immortal beings with nothing to protect and nothing to believe in turned on one another, and in their desperation for power, some of them taught themselves blood magic, a forbidden art that twisted their bodies past recognition. Mortals gave these fallen god warriors a new name, the Darkin, an old Shuriman word that translates most closely to the fallen. What followed is remembered as the Great Darkin War, and it nearly ended the world. The Darkin split into factions, the fiercest led by Aatrox on one side, and a warlord named Solani on the other, and their battles laid waste to Shurima and far beyond. No mortal army could stand against a corrupted god, so the aspects of Targon were forced to intervene. Celestial powers who lent mortals the knowledge they needed to fight back. An aspect of Twilight named Maisha gave the Runeterrans the secret of how to trap a Darkin, and one by one the corrupted warriors were sealed, not killed but bound, their essences locked inside the very weapons they had wielded. Those weapons were scattered and hidden across the world, meant to hold the fallen for all eternity. The cruelty of the method is hard to overstate, because a Darkin sealed in a blade does not sleep. It stays awake and aware through every silent century, unable to move or feel anything, waiting for a hand foolish enough to pick the weapon up. Aatrox himself called this a fate far worse than death. The warlord on the other side of that civil war deserves telling in full, because her story is the most heartbreaking of all the Darkin. Solani did not begin as a warrior at all. She was born the daughter of a healer, and she followed her parents' path, mastering an ancient form of blood magic she used only to save lives. When the rebellion of Icathia set the world on fire, Solani worked without rest to heal the wounded of both sides, and she was so sickened by the endless slaughter that she stood before the Emperor himself and condemned the pointless wars he waged. The priests of the Sun Disk judged her worthy all the same, and she rose through ascension into a god warrior, a compassionate healer now armed with the power of a god. Then the same horror that broke all the others broke her too. The war against the void could wound the mind even when it could not wound the immortal body. And as Shurima collapsed and her fellow Ascended descended into madness and grief, Solani's love for life curdled into something monstrous. She decided that the only way to end war forever was to force the whole world into a single obedient will, and she turned her healing blood magic into a weapon of absolute control. Solani reached out with her power and began enslaving her own Darkin brethren, binding their minds to hers until, it was said, their hearts all beat as one. The strongest-willed among the fallen refused to bend, and chief among them was Aatrox, who despised her attempt to strip away his freedom. That hatred boiled over into open war, Darkin against Darkin. And it raged for so long and so violently that mortals could only watch their world burn. Solani had the terrible gift of turning enemies into puppets, but she lacked the raw battle experience of ancients like Aatrox, and in the end, she could not win. This is the conflict remembered as the Great Darkin War, and it took the intervention of the celestial aspects of Targon. working through mortal hands to finally bring the fallen down and seal them one by one inside their weapons. One figure who chose a different road was Zaun, a Darkin who felt responsible for guiding so many of his brethren into their ascension in the first place. Racked by guilt over what they had become, Zaun travelled to the eastern lands and allied himself with a secretive order of monks, showing mortals the means to seal the fallen. Together they trapped several of the most dangerous Darkin, and afterward, fearing that he too might one day fall to the same darkness, Zaun willingly sealed himself away rather than risk becoming the very thing he hunted. Aatrox is the face of the Darkin and the clearest example of what they became. Freed after millennia trapped inside a great sword, he no longer wants conquest or revenge. He wants oblivion, the end of everything, if only because ending the world would finally end his own suffering. When a mortal grips his blade, Aatrox pours himself into that body, reshaping it into a monstrous armored giant, wearing the wielder like a glove and discarding them when they wear out. He has used up countless hosts this way, and he treats a human life as raw material. His long history includes a massacre in the Freljord so complete that only a single boy survived it, a warrior who grew up to become the barbarian king Tryndamere, carrying that grief into everything he did. That day tells you everything about what Aatrox has become. He did not spare the boy out of mercy. He left one survivor because a lone witness carries the horror outward and keeps it alive, and Tryndamere spent the rest of his life fueled by an undying rage, born in the moment he watched the Darkin butcher his entire people, a fury so consuming it became the source of his own near unkillable strength. Aatrox does not merely kill, he plants suffering and lets it grow. Rast took a different form, a wicked curved scythe, and his story is the tightest struggle of the lot. His weapon was found by a young Ionian assassin named Shieda Kane, a gifted killer who believed he was strong enough to wield a Darkin without being consumed by it. Rast disagrees. Every hour the scythe works at Kane's will, whispering and pushing, trying to overwhelm the young man and claim his body for good. It is a slow war fought inside one person, and its outcome hangs in the balance. Kane convinced he can master the blade, Rast patient and certain that flesh always breaks in the end. There are only two ways that struggle can end. Either Kane wins, bending the Darkin fully to his will, and keeping the scythe as a weapon that obeys him. Or Rast wins, hollowing the young assassin out and wearing his body as the newest incarnation of the fallen. One host, one blade, and only room in the end for a single will, which is exactly the trap every Darkin weapon sets for whoever is arrogant enough to lift it. Varus is perhaps the most tragic of the Darkin, because his prison holds 3 souls instead of 1. Long ago the Darkin bow was sealed away, and much later 2 Ionian hunters found it, a couple named Valmar and Kai. When Noxian invaders left one of them dying, the other made a desperate choice, and together they took up the cursed bow to save what they could, merging with the Darkin inside it. Now 3 consciousnesses share one body. The ancient Darkin Varus straining to take full control, and the 2 lovers still resisting from within, still reaching for each other even as the monster tries to drown them out. The details of that merging make it worse. Valmar and Kai were devoted to one another, and when Noxian soldiers struck one of them down, the other could not bear the loss and reached for the sealed Darkin bow in a desperate bid to save his beloved, and both were pulled inside it together. So the prison holds not 1 tragedy but 3, an ancient hatred that wants only to burn the world, wrapped around 2 young lovers who took up a cursed weapon for the most human reason imaginable. Varus has not fully awakened as a Darkin, and that lingering humanity, that stubborn love, is the only thing keeping the oldest hatred in check. Neferi broke the pattern completely. Sealed as a dagger and buried in a Shuriman tomb, this Darkin waited in the dark until a grave robber cracked the tomb open in the deep desert. With no single strong host nearby, Neferi did something no other Darkin had managed. She poured herself into a whole pack of desert dune hounds at once, spreading her mind across many bodies rather than fighting for control of one. Where the others are lonely, single-minded tyrants, Neferi thinks and hunts as a collective, the hound of 100 bites. Moving as one will through many sets of teeth. It makes her strange even among her own kind, a Darkin who found something like companionship in her own fractured self. Every other Darkin is trapped in a maddening solitude, a single ancient mind screaming inside a single stolen body, and that isolation is a large part of what drove them to ruin. Neferi escaped it. By spreading herself across a whole pack, she is never alone, never confined to one prison of flesh, and so she carries none of the desperate, cornered fury that defines Aatrox or Rast. She is arguably the healthiest mind among the fallen precisely because she stopped trying to be one creature, which is a quietly unsettling thought. A Darkin made stable and content by becoming a pack of predators instead of a person. The Darkin have never been limited to those most famous names. Riot stories have long spoken of 5 great Darkin destined to bring ruin if they ever reunite. And a 5th known fallen, Zaun, entered the world more recently, a Darkin who resists the usual corruption and turns his blade on his own kind, hunting the other fallen rather than joining them. Beyond the sealed ones, at least one Darkin was destroyed rather than imprisoned. The Noxian blood mage Vladimir learned his forbidden art directly from a Darkin, then killed the creature to seize its power for himself, which is why the hemomancy practiced in the shadows of Noxus traces its roots straight back to the fallen of Shurima. Vladimir has lived on for uncounted centuries through that stolen blood magic, and he presides over a hidden cult called the Crimson Circle, a coven of hemomancers who all trace their craft back to the same Darkin source, gathering in secret beneath the Empire's high society and feeding on the vitality of others to preserve their own agelessness. The Darkin tie the ancient past to the living present, a reminder that in Runeterra the most dangerous monsters are often the ones that were once meant to be its protectors. If the Void hungers to erase the world and the Darkin want to end it, the demons of Runeterra want something more intimate. They want to feed on you. Demons in this world are not the horned devils of old myth, and they do not come from any underworld. Each one is an immortal spirit born from a single powerful emotion, and each one feeds on that same emotion in living people, growing stronger the more of it they can stir up. Fear, agony, despair, greed, these are not just feelings to a demon, they are food. The oldest of them have prowled the world since before recorded history, and they cannot truly be killed, only bound, scattered, or starved. Which means they always come back. Evelyn is among the most ancient of these spirits, and she embodies the demon of pain in its most seductive form. She appears to her victims as a beautiful woman, alluring and gentle, drawing them in with the promise of pleasure. What she offers instead is torment. Once she has someone in her grasp, she reveals her true shape, a lashing horror of blades and shadow, and she draws out their suffering slowly because agony is what nourishes her. Evelyn has haunted Runeterra for so long that she has refined cruelty into something like art, and the people she chooses rarely understand what she is until the moment it is far too late. Where Evelyn works through desire, Fiddlesticks works through raw terror, and Fiddlesticks may be the oldest demon of them all. This is the ancient fear, a being so old that it predates most of the world's civilizations, and it takes the form of a ragged effigy stitched together from scavenged parts, a scarecrow that should not be able to move. It announces itself with a cawing of crows and a wrongness in the air, a creeping dread that arrives before the thing itself ever appears. Long ago, a coalition of frightened peoples managed to bind and scatter it, burying the pieces of that terror so it could not gather itself. Fiddlesticks has been slowly reassembling ever since, and where it walks, animals flee and grown warriors weep without knowing why. It does not scheme like Evelyn. It simply is fear, ancient and patient, and impossible to reason with. Nocturne is fear of a slightly different flavour, the terror that lives in sleep. This demon is a living nightmare that clawed its way out of the dream world and into the waking one, a formless darkness that feeds on dread and drowns its victims in their own worst imaginings. Nocturne can smother a mind in shadow and turn the safety of night into a hunting ground. And there is nothing behind it to bargain with, no history or personality, only an appetite for the horror it can wring out of a sleeping world. Of all the demons, it is perhaps the most primal, dread given just enough shape to hunt. Tahm Kench trades on a gentler seeming vice, and that makes him one of the most dangerous of all. He is the demon of gluttony and greed, an enormous toad-like creature known as the River King, and he travels the waterways of the world making deals. Tahm Kench is charming, patient, and endlessly reasonable, and he offers people exactly what they crave most. A shortcut, a fortune, a wish granted. The price is always hidden and always ruinous. And those who accept his bargains tend to end up swallowed whole, carried off inside him to somewhere far worse than where they started. He wears courtesy like a fine coat, but underneath it he is pure appetite, and every kindness he offers is a lure toward a debt that cannot be paid. Beyond these great old spirits, Runeterra also breeds smaller demons, and in the eastern land of Ionia they have a name for them: the Azakana. An Azakana is a lesser demon, a minor manifestation of a person's inner darkness, and it begins almost invisibly, feeding quietly on someone's private guilt, grief, or rage. Left alone, it grows. The more it feeds on that hidden wound, the larger and more monstrous it becomes, until a small, unspoken sorrow has swollen into a beast that can destroy the person who carried it. The Ionians tell of a 1,000-voiced beast, a legendary Azakana of terrible power, and their spirit walkers have learned to hunt these creatures before they can bloom into something worse. The lesson buried in the Azakana is a quiet one, that the darkness a person refuses to face does not stay small. The demons keep turning up in new corners of the world as its stories expand. In the warm seas near Bilgewater, a warrior named Nilla dedicated her life to hunting the greatest demons of legend, and she bound one of them to do it, a demon of joy called Ashlesh, whose power flows through her weapon. With that borrowed strength, she is said to have brought down a demon of change called Imago, and a mad demigod as well, proof that even the oldest of these spirits can be faced by a mortal willing to pay the cost. Yet for every demon a hero manages to bind or scatter, others stir back to life somewhere far away. Because a being made of emotion cannot be permanently destroyed as long as people keep feeling. As long as there is fear to taste and grief to swallow, the demons of Runeterra will always find their way back to the table. Some of Runeterra's monsters were never wild spirits or alien invaders. They were ordinary people once, living in a paradise, and they became horrors through a single act of grief. That paradise was the Blessed Isles, a hidden realm of scholars and healers protected by a great wall of mist, and its fall created the most haunted place in the world, the Shadow Isles. Everything about that region traces back to one catastrophe, remembered simply as the Ruination. The man at the center of it was Viego, a young king of the distant kingdom of Camavor, whose full name ran longer than any crown deserved. Viego loved his queen, Isolde, with a devotion that curdled into obsession, and when she died, he could not accept it. He learned of the Blessed Isles and their sacred waters of life, magic said to hold power over death itself, and he marched an army there to force those waters to bring Isolde back. What he unleashed instead broke the world in that corner forever. The magic went catastrophically wrong. A wave of unnatural death rolled outward from the ritual, and in an instant the paradise died. Every living thing on the Blessed Isles was killed, and then denied true rest, their spirits trapped in undeath. A choking grey fog, called the Black Mist, rose from the ruin, and the Blessed Isles became the Shadow Isles, a drowned green land where the dead cannot die and the living dare not go. The full sequence of that catastrophe is worth tracing, because almost every horror of the Shadow Isles was born in the space of a single afternoon. Isolde had been a poor seamstress from a rural corner of Camavor, a woman who as a child stitched a beloved doll to hold her dreams of a grander life. When the young King Viego saw her, he fell in love at first sight and made her his queen. And he loved her so completely that he neglected his throne to dote on her, letting his kingdom fray around him. His enemies saw their chance and sent an assassin with a poisoned blade to kill the king. The strike was foiled by the speed of his loyal general and niece, Callista, but the poisoned edge grazed Isolde instead, dooming her to a slow death that no physician in Camavor could halt. Desperate, Viego dispatched Callista to find the fabled Blessed Isles and their waters of life. Waters rumoured to cure any ailment. Callista reached the hidden city of Helia and won the trust of its masters, but by the time she returned home, Isolde had already died, and the cure meant nothing for a corpse. When the grief-maddened king demanded to know what she had found, Callista, bound by a promise she had made to the people of the Isles, refused to lead a mourning tyrant to their sacred waters. Viego branded her a traitor and threw her in the dungeon. It was his commander Hecarim who finally coaxed the location out of her, and so the king set sail with his dead wife's body, his knights, and his reluctant niece toward a paradise that had no idea what was coming. The people of Helia met them at the shore and refused to violate the natural order by dragging a soul back from death. Viego ordered Callista to cut them down, and when she would not, Hecarim and his knights turned on her and her soldiers, slaughtering their own countrymen while the king searched for the waters himself. A single lowly custodian, a warden who would soon become something far worse, offered to guide Viego straight to the sacred well. There the king lowered Isolde's body into the waters of life and watched with desperate hope as she stirred and rose. What came back was not his wife. Beneath that well lay an unstable world rune, a fragment of the raw magic that shapes the world, and its power warped the resurrection into something monstrous. Isolde awoke as a wraith of pain and confusion, and in her agony she seized the king's own enchanted blade and drove it through his heart. That blade was no ordinary sword. It carried a shard of Viego's own soul, meant to revive him if he ever fell in battle, and now its magic collided with the magic of the well as both tried to pull the king back from death at once. The two forces locked into a feedback loop that could neither complete nor stop, trapping Viego in an endless cycle of dying and half-healing while black mist poured from his wound. The runic source at the bottom of the well flared out of control, and then the whole thing detonated. A wave of blue-green magical force tore across Helia, shattering every building and killing every living soul, leaving their spirits bound to a corrupted realm. Isolde's soul was blasted into many fragments that scattered across the world, coming to rest in people and objects far from the drowned isles, including the very doll she had sewn as a girl. That is the ruination, and everything grey and hungry about the Shadow Isles flows from that one ruined act of love. Viego himself became the ruined king, and he still walks his broken realm, half mad and utterly consumed by the same grief that destroyed it. He is searching for Isolde still, or for any fragment of her, and his longing spreads the black mist wherever he goes, dragging more of the world into his personal graveyard. Viego is a monster made entirely of love turned poisonous, and that is what makes him so terrible. He does not think of himself as a villain at all. He believes he is a devoted husband trying to reach his wife, and he will unmake every living soul between himself and that impossible reunion without a second thought. The ruination did not create one monster. It created a whole court of them, and the cruelest is Thresh. In life, Thresh was a warden on the Blessed Isles, a jailer entrusted with dangerous knowledge, and he was already a sadist before the mist ever rose, a man who took quiet pleasure in the suffering of those in his care. When the catastrophe came, it did not punish him. It set him free. Now Thresh is the Chain Warden, an undead tormentor who collects souls the way a miser collects coins, luring the desperate and the proud alike, then trapping their spirits inside his green lantern to torture them for eternity. He is patient, intelligent, and genuinely delighted by cruelty, and unlike most of the Shadow Isles dead, he is not driven by grief or confusion. He simply enjoys his work, and the afterlife handed him an endless supply of it. It was Thresh, in his living days as a warden, who whispered Viego toward the sacred waters and helped set the whole disaster in motion. And in the ages since he has grown so skilled at hoarding the black mist that he has begun to slip free of the Shadow Isles entirely, carrying his lantern and his cruelty wherever souls can be found. Hecarim was a commander in Camavor's armies, a knight of terrible ambition, and the ruination fused him forever with his warhorse into a single spectral shape. Now he charges across the Shadow Isles as an enormous armoured centaur wreathed in ghostly fire, leading a phantom cavalry of the damned. Where Hecarim rides, the mist surges and the dead rise to join his endless charge. And he tramples the living beneath him without slowing, drunk on the thrill of the hunt he has been running for longer than any mortal kingdom has stood. Not every soul the ruination claimed serves it willingly. Callista was a noble general betrayed and murdered, and she rose again as a revenant, the spear of vengeance, bound to a single purpose. Her betrayal was a bitter one, because it was Hecarim, her own comrade in Camavor's armies, who ran her and her loyal soldiers through with spears when she refused to slaughter the innocent people of the Blessed Isles. Murdered for keeping her honour, she came back to answer the calls of the betrayed, offering her deadly aid to those who have been wronged as she was, demanding only that they let her exact the punishment. Callista is a monster by appearance, gaunt and spectral and bristling with spears, yet her curse is a kind of grim justice, a dead woman who cannot rest until every act of treachery has been answered in kind. Against all of this stands one of the few figures who fights the mist from within. Maokai was once a peaceful nature spirit bound to a great tree, and the ruination twisted him into a towering, gnarled thing of blackened wood and burning sap. The difference is that Maokai remembers what was lost, and he hates the corruption that took it. Where the other Shadow Isles horrors spread death gladly, Maokai burns with a slow determination to end the mist and free the trapped souls, including his own. He is monstrous to look at and gentle at his root, a creature of the ruin who wants nothing more than to see the ruin undone. There is a bitter irony in what Maokai became, because he was there at the very beginning of the Blessed Isles. When the chain of islands first rose from the deep ocean, Maokai was born as a nature spirit in the shape of a treant. And it was he who found the spring of life, giving water beneath the soil, sank his roots into it, and drank so deeply that he grew hundreds of saplings and planted a green paradise across the whole archipelago. The lush magic he spread is what drew scholars and healers to settle there in the first place. Maokai made the Blessed Isles beautiful, and then he watched a grieving king turn that same beauty into a graveyard, which is why his hatred of the mist burns hotter than anyone else's. There is a living man on those isles as well, or something close to one. Yorick was the last member of a holy order on the Blessed Isles, and he survived the ruination only to be left utterly alone with the dead for uncounted years. The isolation and the mist changed him into the gravedigger, the shepherd of souls, a grim figure who can command the very mist and the wandering spirits within it. Yorick is not evil, but the loneliness of his long vigil has hollowed him into something no longer quite human, a caretaker of an entire graveyard who longs to give the dead the rest that was stolen from them, and to finally find rest himself. He does not walk his vigil entirely alone. Bound to him drifts the Maiden of the Mist, a spectral companion conjured from the black mist and tied, in the deepest lore, to a fragment of the lost queen whose death began everything. She is at once his only company and a piece of the very corruption he fights, which captures the whole cruelty of Yorick's existence. A lonely man given a ghost for a friend, and even she is made of the thing he hates. Not everyone marked by the mist was consumed by it. Senna carried one of the scattered fragments of Isolde's soul inside her, which made the black mist hunt her relentlessly across her whole life. When she and her husband ventured onto the Shadow Isles, Thresh killed her and locked her spirit inside his green lantern, and there she remained for years, tormented but also learning, slowly mastering the very mist that imprisoned her. Her husband hunted the Chain Warden until he finally shattered the lantern and freed every soul inside it, and Senna stepped back into the living world stronger than before, able to wield the black mist as a weapon and turn it against the ruined king who had caused her so much pain. She is one of the rare figures who took the corruption meant to destroy her and forged it into a tool for fighting back. Then there is Karthus, who represents the strangest response to the Shadow Isles of all, because he was not a victim. Karthus was a mortal so consumed by fascination with death that he came to the drowned isles seeking undeath on purpose, and he embraced it as a wonder rather than a curse. Now the Death Singer, he drifts through the mist composing songs in praise of the grave, genuinely convinced that the moment of dying is the most beautiful thing a soul can experience, and eager to share that gift with everyone still foolish enough to cling to life. Where the other undead of the Isles rage or mourn or hunger, Karthus preaches, a monster who believes with perfect sincerity that he is doing the living a kindness by ending them. One horror of the Shadow Isles predates the ruination and answers to no king. Deep in the tangled ruins there dwells Villemor, an ancient and enormous spider god, worshipped by a dark cult, a many-legged deity that demands living sacrifices and grants twisted gifts in return. The most famous of its servants is Elise, once a mortal noblewoman who struck a bargain with the great spider to preserve her youth and beauty. The price is a steady stream of victims. Elise lures men and women to the spider's lair with charm and false promises, feeds them to Villemor, and drains the life from her prey to stay forever young. And over the long years, she has become a monster herself. The Spider Queen, able to shift into a monstrous arachnid shape and command a brood of lesser spiders to do her killing. Everywhere across that green and drowning land drift the lesser dead, the wraiths and mistwalkers. the countless nameless spirits who were caught in the ruination and now wander without memory or purpose, driven only to pull the living into the same grey unlife. The black mist that carries them is a monster in its own right, a hungry weather that creeps out over the sea, and when it touches a ship or a shore, it brings all these horrors with it. That is why the Shadow Isles frighten the world so deeply. Their monsters do not stay put. On the darkest nights, the mist rolls out across the water, reaching for new coasts, and every soul it takes becomes one more figure in Viego's endless, mournful procession. The worst of these tides has a name that sailors whisper with real dread. It is called the Harrowing, a season when the black mist swells and surges far across the ocean to fall upon distant shores, and the coastal town of Bilgewater has learned to bar its doors and arm its people each time the fog comes hunting. During a harrowing, the dead pour off the isles in force, dragging the living into their ranks and twisting ordinary travellers into fresh abominations. And every one of those stolen souls swells the ruined king's ghostly army a little further. The Shadow Isles are not a place the world can simply avoid, because once a year or more the place comes looking for the world instead. The far north of Runeterra, the frozen wilderness called the Freljord, hides a horror that connects back to the very beginning of this story, back to the void. Beneath the endless ice lie the Watchers, and the Watchers are not native to the mortal world any more than the Voidborn are. They belong to that same cold nothingness, ancient entities that reached toward the living lands from the dark, hungering to snuff out warmth and thought, and leave only frozen silence behind. Belveth calls them the Old Masters of the Void, which places them among the most ancient and powerful monsters in all of Runeterra, and the only reason the world still breathes is that long ago someone managed to freeze them in place. That someone was Lysandra, and her story is one of betrayal layered upon betrayal. In the earliest days of the Freljord, 3 sisters led their people, Lysandra, Avarosa, and Serilda, and they were the Iceborn, mortals touched by a rare and sacred power. When the Watchers pressed in from beyond, threatening to consume the north and then the world, Lysandra made a terrible bargain with them, choosing to serve the very things she should have fought. Then, at the decisive moment, she turned on her new masters. Using the power of true ice, a magic so cold it can freeze even immortal things, Lysandra sealed the Watchers beneath the northern wastes, trapping them in a frozen prison where they have lain ever since. Aware but immobile, exactly as the void hates to be. The road to that sealing was paved with ambition and loss, and it is one of the oldest tragedies in the world. In an age when the barriers between realms were thin and beings of old magic walked freely, the 3 sisters each sought to master one of the forces that governed the world, and each paid a price for the attempt. Serilda reached for the heavens and was stripped of her voice by the first twilight. Avarosa confronted the twisting dark beneath the world and was left deafened by its endless emptiness. Lysandra stood against the wild magic of the mortal world and was blinded by the claws of the great bear god of the north. Robbed of her sight, Lysandra learned to walk instead through the dreams of others. And in those dreams, she alone came to see the darkness below for what it truly was. An abyss that promised not just an ending, but a terrible kind of infinity. It was Lysandra who made the fateful bargain. Communing with the god-like entities in the deep, she struck a deal on behalf of all 3 sisters without telling them, promising to prepare Runeterra for the Watchers' coming in exchange for near immortality and power. The Watchers transformed the sisters and their closest followers into the Iceborn, gifting them magic and long life, and in return, the Iceborn conquered a vast empire and raised a mighty fortress at the edge of a deep chasm. For a time, it seemed a fair trade. Then Avarosa and Cyrilda came to understand what their servitude truly meant, and they decided that the only thing worse than death was to spend eternity as slaves to an emptiness that wanted to consume all creation. They raised their own iceborne hordes and marched on Lyssandra's citadel, and the three sisters who had once been unstoppable together now faced each other across a bridge above the abyss. At the height of that final battle, the Watchers themselves finally broke through into the physical world, and the shock of it changed everything. Formless in their own realm, they had never known bodies or time or sensation, and the instant they tore into reality, they experienced heat and pain and the crushing linearity of existence all at once, and it disoriented them utterly. In that moment, Lysandra saw the full horror of what she had invited, and she made her choice. She wove a spell that sacrificed armies of Iceborne, her own sisters among them, to entomb the Watchers in a glacial prison of true ice that could never melt. The world was saved, but at the cost of nearly everyone Lysandra loved, and she has spent the long centuries since keeping a lonely and guilty watch, praying the ice holds. 9 runic seals bind that prison, and one by one they have been fading. The tribes that trace their blood to Avarosa and Cyrilda still tell prophecies that the lost sisters will return, and the great war mothers of the modern Freljord, the Archer Queen and the brutal raider who lead its largest tribes, are widely believed to be their reincarnations, which is exactly why the Ice Witch has quietly hunted anyone who might fit the legend. The cost of that victory fell on everyone around her. Lysandra's betrayal of the Watchers came alongside the death of her own sisters, and she has spent the centuries since as the Ice Witch, an effectively immortal sorceress who founded a secretive order called the Frostguard. To the people of the Freljord, the Frostguard seem like humble keepers of tradition. In truth, they exist to guard the frozen prison and to hide what lies beneath it, and Lysandra has rewritten history so thoroughly that almost no one remembers the Watchers were ever real. She rules from the shadows, forever watching the ice for cracks, because she knows what waits below is only sleeping. And she knows the day the true ice fails is the day the world ends. The Freljord's true ice does more than hold monsters. It preserves them, and it has kept creatures alive from ages the rest of the world has entirely forgotten. The strangest survivor is Nar, a tiny prehistoric yordle from a time so distant that his kind may be the ancestors of the little creatures scattered across Runeterra today. Nar was frozen solid in true ice long ago and thawed out in the modern era, blinking awake into a world that had moved on without him. Most of the time he is small, curious, and almost sweet, but when Nar is frightened or enraged, he transforms into Mega Nar, a hulking primal beast many times his size, a glimpse of the enormous and dangerous megafauna that once roamed a younger world. He is living proof that the ice remembers, and that some of what it holds is far older and far larger than anything walking the surface now. Nar was in fact caught in the very cataclysm Lysandra unleashed to seal the Watchers, and that same wave of magic did more than freeze one small creature. It shattered the civilization of the Yeti, ancient magical beings of the far north, robbing most of them of their power and driving the survivors into feral savagery. And in the chaos of their emergence, before the true ice closed over them, the Watchers managed to craft the first crude prototypes of the Voidborn inside the physical world. One of those early prototypes was the coldly analytical Vel'Koz, which means the Freljord's frozen abyss is not only a prison for the Void's masters, but the birthplace of some of its oldest servants. The North breeds its own beasts even without the ice. The Ursine are a race of massive, intelligent bears who follow the ancient demigod Volibear, and they are warriors in their own right, savage and proud. Volibear himself sits at the edge of what counts as a monster, one of the old spirit gods of the Freljord, a storm and a beast given a single furious form, worshipped by tribes who fear his thunder. He is one of the firstborn, the oldest demigods of the north, who shaped the frozen land before any mortal ruled it, and his claws carry a special weight in this story. Because it was Volibear who tore out the eyes of Lysandra in the earliest days, the wound that first drove her to walk in dreams and led her to the Watchers. His brother Orn is another of these firstborn, a smith god of the mountain and the forge, more craftsman than killer, and it was Orn who is said to have carved and built the great bridge and the deep chasm that would become the prison of the Watchers, shaping true ice and star metal at the sisters' request, without ever guessing what his work would one day hold. A third of the firstborn is Anivia, the cryophoenix, a vast bird of living ice who dies and is reborn again and again with the turning of the seasons, an eternal guardian spirit of the tundra rather than a predator. These beings are not monsters in the way the void creatures are, but they are not people either. They are something the Freljord folk pray to and dread in equal measure. Elemental powers wearing the shapes of animals, reminders that in the frozen north the line between god and beast was never drawn very firmly at all. Not every great beast of Runeterra is a horror to be feared. Some are simply magnificent, and none more so than the dragons. True dragons are rare in this world, ancient and enormous, winged reptiles that breathe elemental fury and can live for spans of time that make human kingdoms look like passing seasons. They are the undisputed rulers of the sky, both beautiful and terrifying, and their society revolves around strength, pride, and the hoarding of treasure. Dragons regard themselves as the pinnacle of creation, and they hold their bloodline sacred, which is why they treat any mixing of dragon blood with lesser races as an abomination to be hunted down and destroyed. Shyvana learnt that hatred firsthand because she is a half-dragon, born of a human mother and a dragon father. She can pass as a woman and can also unleash her true nature, transforming into a towering dragon wreathed in flame. To full-blooded dragons, she is an insult to their kind, and she has spent much of her life pursued for the crime of simply existing. Shyvana carries the loneliness of belonging fully to neither world. Too monstrous for the human courts that fear her fire, too impure for the dragons that would see her dead, and her story is one of a creature searching for a place where her divided nature is not a mark against her. The richest dragon lore comes from a lost kingdom called Camavor, the same doomed realm that gave the world Viego and the Ruination. Long before mortals settled there, dragons ruled the land, and when humans arrived the two came into conflict until the first king of Camavor did something no conqueror expects to do. He humbled himself, knelt before the great dragon matriarch, and begged for her strength. That matriarch would come to be known as Grandmother Viper, the progenitor of all Camavoran dragons, and she agreed to an ancient pact called the Oath of Volvisperi Desinvine, binding the dragon bloodline to the royal family for generations. In exchange for lending their power to Camavor's armies, the dragons were kept satisfied with livestock and showered with gold, jewels, and precious artifacts, treasures they piled higher with every passing century. That loyalty had its limits. When the mad King Viego called upon the imperial dragons to follow him to the Blessed Isles, they refused, sensing the madness in him that no mortal could yet see. Their refusal spared them from marching into the Ruination, but it could not spare the kingdom, and after Viego's fall, Camavor collapsed into ruin. The surviving dragons dwindled, roosting in a crumbling palace where no monarch would ever sit again, and some of them wandered too close to the Shadow Isles and were twisted by the black mist into monstrous wraiths, dragons remade into undead horrors. Centuries passed before another imperial dragon hatched at all. That hatchling is Smolder, the youngest dragon in all of Runeterra. And his story is far gentler than most in this accounting. When he was small, his mother had to range farther and farther for food, and while the nest sat unguarded, Noxian beastmasters stole the young dragon and sailed for home to sell him. His mother found the ship in time and destroyed it with a single breath of fire. But in the chaos, the current swept the hatchling away to an island off the mainland, alone and afraid. There a human child named Marinos found him, named him Smolder, and kept him a secret for years, until the day Smolder finally coughed up his first real flame and accidentally set an entire forest ablaze. The roar of that fire drew his mother back to him at last, after decades of searching. And now the two roost together on a cliffside, while she teaches him the history and duty of imperial dragons. One day, when he is ready, they intend to return home and usher in a new golden age for Carnivore. The dragons players fight in the game itself belong to a different sort. The elemental drakes that rule the wilds around contested ground, each one attuned to fire, water, earth, air, or stranger powers still. These beasts grant their killers a portion of their elemental strength, and the greatest of them, the Elder Dragon, is a prize worth risking everything to claim. They are wild creatures rather than characters with names and histories, but they carry the same truth as their nobler cousins, that to face a dragon on its own ground is to gamble your life against a living force of nature. Then there is a dragon who is not truly of Runeterra at all. Aurelian's soul is a celestial dragon, one of the oldest beings in existence. A cosmic entity who forges stars and once wandered the heavens, shaping the very sky. His power is almost beyond comprehension. Born in the first breath of creation, he drifted through the empty dark, filling it with galaxies and suns for the sheer joy of making, and he rarely met anything close to his equal. His downfall came from vanity. Returning one day to a sun he had kindled eons earlier, he found a small world circling it that he had not made, and its people cried out in worship. Flattered, he descended upon the tallest mountain of that world in the shape of a vast and terrible dragon, and the mortals there named him for the golden light of their sky and offered him a splendid crown in thanks. The moment it touched his brow, he understood the trick. The crown clamped down with a force even he could not break, and it began draining his knowledge of how stars are made, feeding that stolen wisdom to the scheming aspects of the mountain. They used his celestial power to raise a great gleaming disk and forge the immortal god warriors of the desert below, which means the very ascension that built Shurima's heroes and its Darkin was powered by a captive star dragon's plundered secrets. For ages he was bound this way, forced to watch the small wars of gods and mortals from the sky. Now the magic is at last weakening, flecks of gold falling from his crown like comets, and Aurelian's soul regards the whole world below with cold and simmering fury. Longing to shrug off his chains, and perhaps to punish the tiny thieves who dared to cage a maker of worlds. Some of Runeterra's monsters were not born, and were not summoned. They were made, stitched together, or reanimated, or grown in secret laboratories by people who should have known better. Nowhere is this truer than in the twin cities of the north, the gleaming Piltover above, and the poisoned undercity of Zaun below, where ambition and chemistry combine to produce horrors that then refuse to stay in their cages. Alongside them stands the Empire of Noxus, which has never seen a corpse it did not consider a resource. And between these places, the world has learned that the most reliable way to create a monster is to build one on purpose. Warwick is the clearest warning of what that ambition costs. In life, he was a violent, remorseless killer who stalked the lawless depths of Zaun, and the mad chemist Singed took hold of him and turned him into something far worse than a mere murderer. through chemtech surgery and alchemical torment, Singed remade the man into a beast, a hulking wolf-like predator fitted with tubes and machinery that flood his body with rage-inducing chemicals. Now Warwick hunts by the scent of blood, and above all the blood of the guilty, tracking wrongdoers through the toxic fog of the Undercity and tearing them apart. He is caught between the man he was and the monster he has become, tormented by fragments of memory even as the chemicals drive him to kill. A predator built by another man's hands and set loose to run. Noxus prefers to reuse its dead rather than reinvent the living. Zaun was one of the Empire's greatest warriors, a berserker who fell in battle centuries ago after slaying an enemy king with his bare hands. Death should have ended him. Instead, Noxus dug him up because a hero that powerful was too valuable to leave in the ground, and its reanimators dragged his rotting body back to a mockery of life, patching him together with iron and dark craft. Now Zaun is a shambling, decaying juggernaut, held upright by war machinery, thrown into the front of every battle the Empire fights. Somewhere inside the rot, a spark of the old warrior still flickers, still wanting to serve, and Noxus keeps that spark just alive enough to make sure its favourite weapon never truly rests. Urgot rebuilt himself into a monster out of pure spite. Once Noxus's most feared executioner, a man who believed utterly in the Empire's creed that only the strong deserve to survive, Urgot was betrayed and cast down into a brutal Zaunite prison mine called the Dredge. Down in that pit, broken and abandoned, he did not die. He tore himself apart and put himself back together, fusing his ruined body with the very machinery that had enslaved him. Emerging as the Dreadnought, a nightmare of flesh and iron and grinding gears. Urgot came to see his transformation as a truth revealed rather than a wound suffered, deciding that he had become the perfect expression of his own harsh philosophy, and he now spreads his gospel of survival through terror, a self-made monster preaching that the weak were always meant to be crushed beneath the strong. Not every Zaunite horror understands what it is. Dr. Mundo is a hulking purple brute from the depths of the Undercity, an escaped inmate of a grim asylum who is utterly convinced that he is a brilliant physician. He carries a cleaver and a bag of dubious medicines. He treats agony as therapy, and he is almost impossible to kill, shrugging off wounds that would fell an army. The horror of Mundo is wrapped in absurdity, because he genuinely means well by his own broken logic, offering his violent care to a world that never asked for it. Behind the cartoonish menace lies a creature so altered by whatever was done to him, or whatever he did to himself, that he can no longer see the difference between healing and harm. Then there is Briar, and Briar is the newest and one of the strangest of these manufactured monsters. She was created near the end of a Noxian Grand General's reign by the Black Rose, a secretive cabal of blood mages hidden inside the Empire's aristocracy. And she was built to be a new kind of living weapon, a being made entirely of blood magic that needs no food or water and runs instead on blood alone. Her makers wanted a perfect assassin. What they got was an insatiable hunger given a body, a creature so consumed by bloodlust that on her first missions she slaughtered friend and foe alike, unable to tell a target from a bystander. Judged too dangerous to use and too powerful to destroy, Briar was locked in a special pillory, a restraint fixed with a hemalith gemstone that calms her frenzied mind. And then she was sealed in a cell to be forgotten. Alone for years, listening to the mindless hemomania of the other failed experiments around her, she slowly came to want something more than blood, a life and a mind of her own. Eventually, she loosened the hemalith, freed herself, and stepped out into the world. And now she roams as a living weapon, controlled by no one. chasing knowledge and experience with the same appetite she once turned only toward killing, keeping her pillory locked until the moment she chooses to let the frenzy loose. Not all of these made creatures turned out cruel. Deep in a Zaun laboratory, scientists grew a sentient mass of chemical ooze and labeled it a secret weapon, and that creature escaped before it could be used for harm. Against every expectation, it grew a conscience. Zac, as he came to be called, is a stretchy, good-natured blob of living slime who chose kindness over destruction, protecting the people of the Undercity instead of terrorizing them. In a place that manufactures monsters as a matter of routine, Zac stands out precisely because he decided not to be one. An experiment that walked out of the lab and elected, all on its own, to do good with a body that was designed to do damage. Beyond the laboratories and the battlefields, the wild places of Runeterra hold older things, creatures of stone and crystal and instinct that were guarding the land long before any empire rose to claim it. These are not villains in the usual sense. Many of them are protectors, and their monstrousness lies only in their size, their strangeness, and the terrible power they wield when something disturbs their long watch. To the people who stumble across them, though, a mountain that stands up and starts walking is a monster all the same. Skarna is the last waking member of a race called the Bracken. Ancient crystalline beings shaped something like enormous scorpions, native to the deep places of Shurima. The Bracken are extraordinary for one reason above all. Their life essence, their very souls and memories, are stored in the great crystals they carry, and for ages the entire species slept in hibernation beneath the sands, dreaming together while the world above changed. Skarna woke to a nightmare. Humans had discovered the Bracken crystals and prized them for the raw magic locked inside, and they had begun tearing them from the earth, mining and selling the sleeping souls of Skarna's people like so much ore. Now the great crystal scorpion fights a lonely war to protect his hibernating kin and to recover the stolen crystals before they can be shattered or drained. A guardian defending a race that cannot wake to defend itself, carrying the weight of a whole people's memory on his back. The mountains of Runeterra hide guardians of pure stone. Malphite is one of them, and his existence is a lonely riddle even to himself. He is the last surviving shard of a colossal living monument, an enormous being of animate rock that was destroyed in ages past, and Malphite broke away from that ruin as a single fragment given consciousness and purpose. That monument had a name and a maker. During the long war against the Void, an ascended of the Western Jungle Kingdom named Nizook built a titanic superweapon called the Monolith to fight the alien tide. And when that great construct was finally shattered in the battles around Icathia, Malphite rose from its broken shards. He does not fully remember what he was made to do. Only that he was made to serve some greater whole that no longer exists, and so he wanders in search of a new purpose, a piece of a shattered giant looking for meaning in a world that has forgotten the thing he came from. He is slow, patient, and immovable, and when roused he strikes with the force of a landslide. Demacia, the proud kingdom of law and order, built a guardian of its own, though it did not quite understand what it was making. Galio is an immense stone colossus carved from petricite, a rare material that soaks up magic, and he was created to stand watch over the realm and protect it from hostile sorcery. The strange thing about Galio is that he needs magic to move at all. Without it, he is only a statue, standing silent and still for years at a time. And he wakes only when enough magic gathers nearby to animate his massive frame. When he does stir, this enormous being reveals a surprisingly gentle and earnest heart, a colossus who cherishes the fleeting moments he gets to spend awake among the tiny people he protects, then falls back into stone slumber to wait for the next spark of magic to call him back to life. The deserts and wilds hold smaller mysteries as well. Rammus, the armored creature often called the armadillo, is wrapped in so many contradictory legends that no one is sure what he truly is. A rolling, spike-shelled enigma of the Shuriman sands, who says little and endures everything. Across the jungles and plains, the great predators run their eternal hunts. And the fiercest rivalry among them belongs to the beast hunter Rengar and the void creature Kha'Zix, the two of them tracking each other across the wilderness, each obsessed with claiming the trophy the other represents. Between the stone giants who guard forgotten purposes and the predators who live only to hunt, the wild places of Runeterra prove that the world does not need laboratories or dark magic to produce monsters. Sometimes it simply grows them out of crystal and rock and instinct, and lets them keep their ancient watch. The seas of Runeterra hide their own kingdom of monsters, and nowhere feels their presence more than Bilgewater, a lawless port city that was built, quite literally, on the hunting of sea beasts. Bilgewater's whole economy runs on dragging enormous creatures out of the deep, rendering them down for their meat and oil and bone, and the harbour stinks of that grim trade. The waters beyond it swarm with giant serpents and krakens, monsters large enough to swallow a ship, and the sailors who work those seas live with the constant knowledge that something below could rise at any moment and pull them all under. In Bilgewater, the line between hunter and prey shifts with every voyage. Above and beneath all of it looms a god. The people of the Isles worship Nagakaburos, the mother serpent, a vast oceanic deity of life, motion, and the sea itself, sometimes pictured as a colossal kraken whose countless eyes and endless hunger represent the ceaseless forward churn of existence. Nagakaburos is not evil, but she is immense and indifferent in the way the ocean is indifferent, a force that demands her followers keep moving, keep growing, and never let fear anchor them in place. Her faith is carried by the Buhru, the original people of the Isles, and her chosen prophet is Illaoi, a towering priestess who wields a massive golden idol and tests the souls of those she meets, ripping the spirit loose from a person to see whether it is strong enough to face the truth of itself. Through Illaoi, the goddess reaches into the lives of mortals, and those who fail her test rarely walk away whole. The most feared monster of the deep was once an ordinary man. Nautilus was a diver who explored the ocean floor, and his own crew betrayed him, cutting his lifeline and leaving him to sink into the crushing dark. He should have drowned. Instead, at the very bottom, he became bound to an ancient and enormous suit of armor waiting in the depths, and he rose again as a titan of the deep. A giant of rusted metal who tolls a great bell before he strikes. Nautilus now drags ships and sailors down into the black water, driven by a betrayal he can never forget, and he pays special attention to those who would abandon their own to save themselves. He is a slow and sorrowful kind of horror, an honest man drowned by treachery and returned as the ocean's grudge given weight and iron. Pike shares that story of betrayal and return, but where Nautilus is sorrowful, Pike is precise. In life, he worked the most dangerous job in Bilgewater, harvesting monsters from inside the belly of a great sea beast, until his captain and crewmates cheated him and left him to die in the depths. Whatever weighted down there did not let him rest. Pike came back drowned and changed, gifted with the ability to slip through shadows and reappear where no one expects him, and he turned that power toward a single purpose. He hunts the corrupt captains and cheats of Bilgewater, the men who grow fat by betraying their crews, adding each new name to a death list that never seems to end. The Blood Harbour Ripper is a monster made of the sea's cruelty and a dead man's memory, and the powerful of Bilgewater have learned that no lock and no crowd can keep him out. Not everything in those waters wants to drown you. Fizz belongs to an ancient amphibious race, small tricksters of the reef who were swimming these seas long before humans arrived to fish them. And though he looks like one of the little folk found elsewhere in the world, he is something older and stranger, tied to the ocean in ways the surface dwellers do not understand. Fizz guards the waters he calls home with mischief and cunning, and when he needs muscle, he calls on a friend from the deep, an enormous shark that answers to him. Bursting out of the water to swallow whatever has earned his displeasure. He serves, in his way, the mysterious powers of the sea, a reminder that the ocean's monsters are not always giants and horrors. Sometimes they are small, clever, and playing a game whose rules only they remember. The sea hides a darker secret too, because the void does not only claw up through the desert sands. Far beneath the waves lies a drowned rift, one of the old wounds through which the emptiness leaks into the world, and it falls to an ocean-dwelling people to hold it back. The Mirai are a tribe of sea vastaya who live in the deep near a sacred stone whose light keeps the voidborn of the abyss at bay. That light fades over time and must be renewed, and each generation one of the Mirai. A tidecaller is charged with the perilous task of retrieving a fresh stone. The most recent of them is Nami, who took up her people's burden when the duty could no longer wait. She may look like a graceful mermaid rather than a monster, but her whole story is a quiet war against the same cosmic hunger that birthed Cho'Gath and Belveth. Fought in the crushing dark, where almost no one on the surface will ever know it is happening. The void, it turns out, presses against every seam of the world at once. The sky, the sand, the ice, and the bottom of the sea. Taken together, the creatures of the sea complete the picture of a world absolutely crowded with monsters. From the drowned titans and vengeful ghosts of Bilgewater to the great serpent goddess who churns beneath it all, the ocean holds as many terrors as the land, and it guards them behind miles of dark water where no army can reach. The people who live by that sea have made their peace with it the only way they can, by hunting the monsters before the monsters hunt them, and by praying to a goddess who cares nothing for their fear and everything for whether they keep moving. The Darkin were not the only monsters the ritual of ascension produced. That same ancient magic, the power to raise a mortal into a god warrior beneath the sun disk, could just as easily create a savior or a nightmare, and the sands of Shurima hold examples of both. Ascension was meant to be a gift and a duty, but it amplified whatever already lived inside a person. And when it took hold of the wrong soul, or when it went wrong at the wrong moment, it made horrors that have haunted the desert ever since. Renekton shows how a noble being can be broken into a monster without ever choosing corruption. He was a proud ascended warrior, crocodile-headed and fierce, and the loyal brother of the wise Nasus. The bond between them ran deep from the very start of their godhood, because on the day of Nasus's ascension, his brother was too weak to climb the final steps to the sun disk, and Renekton, a mere warrior expecting to be burned to ash for his boldness, lifted Nasus in his arms and carried him up into the blinding light. Against all expectation, the disk raised them both, and Renekton went on to become the Butcher of the Sands, a hero whose ferocity won Shurima countless victories. When the Empire fell and the traitor Zirith threatened to tear the world apart, Renekton did something heroic. He dragged Zirith down into the tomb of the Emperors and called on Nasus to seal them both inside. Sacrificing his own freedom to imprison a greater threat, that should have been the end of a hero's story. Instead, it became the beginning of a monster's, because the tomb held them for thousands of years, and across those long centuries, Zirith whispered ceaselessly in the dark, convincing Renekton that Nasus had buried him there on purpose, jealous of his glory and unwilling to share immortality. Piece by piece that lie cracked his mind. When Shurima finally rose again and greedy scavengers broke the tomb open, Renekton emerged not as a hero, but as a berserk beast, half mad with fury, hunting the brother he now believes betrayed him, consumed by a hatred that even he no longer fully understands. He is a warning that imprisonment and time can hollow out a great soul until only the monster is left. Xerath is the one who did the hollowing, and he is a monster of pure ambition. Born a slave in old Shurima, he was brilliant and bitter in equal measure, a gifted magus who could not accept the low place his birth had assigned him. He befriended the young Prince Azir, who promised one day to free him so they might be as brothers, and Xerath rose in his service, but all the while he nursed his resentment and schemed for the power he believed he deserved. When Azir became emperor and resolved to undergo ascension, Xerath saw his opening. He arranged a diversion that lured the only two beings strong enough to stop him. The god warriors Nasus and Renekton, far from the capital, releasing a creature of living fire that only they could subdue. Then, at the height of the ritual, Xerath cast Azir aside and forced the Sun Priests to raise him instead. The magic recoiled catastrophically. It killed the Emperor, denied him the godhood he reached for, obliterated the capital city and its sun disk, and consumed Xerath's own body, leaving him something no longer human at all. He is now a being of raw arcane energy, a living storm of magic barely held together inside a shell of ancient stone wrappings and chains, and his hunger for dominion has only grown across the millennia. Xerath wants to rule everything, gods and mortals alike. And the only thing that has ever truly contained him is the stone that holds his own boundless power from tearing loose. Against these two stands Nasus, and Nasus matters here precisely because he did not fall. The jackal-headed Ascended, the curator of the Sans, faced the same catastrophe, the same loss of empire and purpose, and he kept his mind and his honor intact. He became a keeper of knowledge and a guardian of the old ways, wise and patient where his brother became wild and where Xerath became monstrous. Nasus proves that ascension did not doom anyone by itself. The power only ever revealed and magnified what a person carried inside, which is why the same golden light that made noble guardians also made the Darkin, made a raging beast of a loyal brother, and made a god of energy out of a resentful slave. In Shurima, the greatest monsters and the greatest heroes were forged in exactly the same fire, and only the soul that entered it decided which one came out. Some of the beings that haunt Runeterra are not predators or experiments at all. They are forces, the shapes that abstract things take when a world is soaked in magic, and death itself is the greatest of them. In this world, death walks as kindred, a single spirit split into two forms that are never apart. One half is Lamb, a graceful figure in a pale mask who carries a bow, calm and almost kind. The other half is Wolf, a ravenous shadow of teeth and hunger, who strains always toward the chase. Together they are the end that comes for every living thing, and the choice they offer is the only mercy in it. Those who accept their fate are granted a clean and gentle release by Lamb's arrow. Those who run are hunted down and torn apart by Wolf. Kindred is not evil, and cannot be, because death is not cruelty, only certainty, and in a land crowded with creatures that cheat the grave, the twin spirit exists to remind everyone that the natural order still has a face, and that face is patient. That is why Kindred stands quietly opposed to so many of the other monsters in this accounting. The undead of the Shadow Isles, the immortal Darkins sealed in their weapons, the ageless blood mages and the deathless god warriors, every one of them is a refusal of the very thing Lamb and Wolf represent. Where the Ruination trapped a whole kingdom on the wrong side of death, and the Void seeks to erase death along with everything else, Kindred simply keeps arriving. gentle arrow for the willing and gnashing teeth for the fleeing, the one power in the world that insists endings are supposed to happen. In a setting this obsessed with cheating the grave, the spirit of death is almost a mercy, and very nearly a hero. The eastern land of Ionia sits closest of all to the world of spirits, and there the barrier between the living and the dead grows thin enough to cross. In that place the spirit realm bleeds into the material one, and beings of dream and memory and emotion walk among people as though it were the most ordinary thing in the world. This is where the lesser demons called Azakana take root, feeding on private sorrow until they swell into monsters. And it is where the greatest of them is remembered, the thousand-voiced beast, an Azakana grown so vast and so old that it speaks with the stolen voices of everyone it has ever consumed. The spirit walkers of Ionia spend their lives learning to move between these two worlds, hunting the darkness that gathers there before it can spill fully into the waking land. Yet Ionia's spirits are not all horrors, and that is the important thing about the realm between worlds. For every Azakana feeding on grief there is a gentler spirit, a guardian of the forest or a keeper of forgotten shrines, a being of pure kindness given shape by the same magic that shapes the monsters. The difference between a spirit and a demon in Runeterra often comes down to what it feeds on and what it wants. A demon takes, draining fear or agony or greed out of the living to sustain itself forever. A spirit more often simply is, embodying a season or a place or an idea without any hunger to consume the people around it. The two can look alike from the outside, and a frightened traveller may not be able to tell which one is watching from the trees. But they belong to different families entirely, one born to devour and one born only to endure. This is the subtle truth that runs underneath so much of Runeterra's darkness. The same magic that fills the world with wonder also fills it with hunger, and the line between the miraculous and the monstrous is thinner than anyone would like. Death walks as a masked archer and her ravening wolf. Grief grows teeth in the forests of Ionia. Emotion itself can wake up, take a body, and start to hunt. In a world this saturated with power, a monster is often just a feeling or a force or an ending that has learned how to move on its own, and the people who live there have had to make peace with the knowledge that the dark is not empty. It is listening, and sometimes it is hungry, and sometimes, on the rarest and quietest nights, it means them no harm at all. Runeterra is full of creatures that look like monsters and are not, and any honest guide has to draw that line clearly, because the world is home to whole peoples who wear the shapes of beasts while carrying the hearts of anyone else. The largest of these are the Vastaya, a diverse race descended long ago from the union of ancient humans and the raw magic of the spirit realm. Their origin traces back to a hidden corner of the eastern lands, where a group of humans once fled to escape the horrors of the Great Void War. There they found shelter among a tribe of shape-shifting spirit creatures called the Vastaya Shire, deathless beings, so attuned to natural magic that they could take the power of the spirit realm into themselves and wield the living world as a weapon. When titans fell from the sky and shattered the peace of those first lands, the most enlightened mortals joined with that spirit power to fight them off, and they were hailed as the heroes of the age. Their mingled descendants became the Vastaya. Over the centuries, the Vastaya carry animal features, feathers, fur, scales, tails, horns, and a deep connection to spirit magic. And they settled into many tribes across the world, each taking on the shape of the creature that best matched its nature. The lion-like Kilash of the Shuriman East live for the glory of the hunt. The bird-winged Lotlan of the forests fling razor feathers in battle. Fox-like tricksters and chameleon-skinned shapeshifters who can borrow any face round out a race of people, not horrors. and treating them as monsters is exactly the mistake that has driven so much conflict between them and the human nations that fear what they do not recognize. Sadly, their magic is fading. No new vastaya have been born in generations, and the spirit power that made them is thinning as humans disturb the currents of the world. Which means this ancient people may be quietly nearing its end even as the mortals around them still mistake them for beasts. The bloodline has not vanished entirely though, because it runs thin through certain humans too. A brawler whose mother was vastaya can call up a flicker of that old power in a fight, and a huntress raised in the deep jungle inherited enough of the lineage to shift into a great cat when she stalks her prey. These half-vastaya walk more easily in human society, carrying only a spark of the spirit magic that once made their ancestors into legends. A last diluted echo of the race that helped save the world from titans long ago. Alistar makes the distinction plain. He is a minotaur, an enormous horned warrior and one of the last survivors of a proud people, and to Noxian eyes that made him nothing more than a beast to be broken. The Empire enslaved him and forced him to fight as a gladiator for the amusement of crowds, expecting a mindless animal. What they had captured was a grieving, honourable being who remembered his lost family and his slaughtered people, and when Alistar finally broke his chains, he did not become the monster they had tried to make of him. Instead, he turned his strength to protecting the weak and the enslaved, a towering figure of horns and muscle, whose gentleness toward the helpless is as fierce as his rage toward the cruel. He looks like something out of a nightmare and behaves like a guardian, which is the whole point. The trolls sit closer to the edge. Across the Freljord and the wild places, trolls are a brutish, hulking people, regenerating quickly and living by strength, and to most of Runeterra, they are simply monsters, raiding and smashing whatever crosses their path. Their king, Trundle, is cleverer than any of them, a cunning brute who understands that brains cut deeper than brawn. He united the scattered trolls under his rule and armed himself with a cursed club carved from a shard of true ice, and he schemes his way toward power in the frozen north, playing the fool while planning 3 steps ahead. The trolls show how blurry the boundary can get, because they are a people with their own kind of society, and they are also, by most measures, exactly the kind of ravenous threat the word monster was invented to describe. The far north offers the gentlest rebuttal to the whole idea of the monster in the form of Willump, a yeti. Yetis are enormous, shaggy beasts of the Freljord, and by rights Willump should have been just another lonely horror wandering the ice, the last magical remnant of a broken kind. Instead, he found a boy. Nunu was a child searching the tundra for his lost mother, and rather than devour him, the great creature took him in, and the two became inseparable. Now the boy rides the shoulders of the beast across the snow, and together they roam the frozen wilds powered by little more than imagination and a magical song, a small human and a towering monster who chose friendship over fear. To anyone glimpsing them from a distance, Willump is a nightmare in the blizzard. Up close he is the softest heart in the north, which is exactly the lesson the beast peoples of Runeterra keep trying to teach a world too frightened to learn it. What all of this reveals is that in Runeterra monstrousness is not really about shape at all. A minotaur can be a protector, a slime creature grown in a lab can choose kindness, and a half-dragon can spend her life fleeing those who would kill her for her blood. Meanwhile, a grieving king in fine robes can drown a paradise. A charming man of business can be a demon of gluttony, and a beautiful woman can be the oldest torturer in the world. The true monsters of this world are defined by hunger and by harm, by the drive to consume, corrupt, or destroy. And that drive can hide behind a lovely face just as easily as it can loom behind fangs and claws. The beast peoples of Runeterra spend their lives paying for a confusion the world refuses to correct, judged as monsters for their forms, while the real horrors move freely, wearing whatever shape lets them get close. Anyone who has spent time on the battlefields where these champions clash knows that the fighters are not the only creatures on the field. The contested ground itself teems with wild monsters, neutral beasts that belong to no side and answer to no one, and claiming them is one of the oldest games of strength in Runeterra. The greatest of these is Baron Nashor, the enormous void serpent that nests in the heart of the battlefield, coiled and screaming, guarding a power worth risking everything to seize. Killing the Baron is a monumental task that demands a whole team working together, and the reward it grants can turn the tide of an entire war, which is why armies circle it warily, each side waiting for the other to bleed itself dry against those gnashing jaws. Baron Nashor is not the only void creature to have wormed its way onto the field. The Rift Herald is another, a strange one-eyed void beast that can be broken loose and turned into a living, battering ram, charging down fortifications for whoever manages to claim it. In more recent days, smaller void horrors have begun to appear as well, little scuttling grubs that emerge from cracks in the earth, a sign of the void's slow and constant pressure against the seams of the world. Even here, in the middle of a contested battlefield, the same hunger that gnaws at Icathia and birthed Belveth keeps pushing through, taking whatever small shapes it can. Because the void never stops trying to widen every crack it finds. The skies and rivers of the field belong to the elemental dragons, the wild drakes attuned to fire, water, earth, air, and stranger forces, each of them ruling its domain until a bold enough team comes to claim its strength. These beasts reshape the very land around them as they hold their territory, and the mightiest of their kind, the ancient elder dragon, appears only late in the longest and most desperate battles, offering overwhelming power to whoever can bring it down. To face a drake is to bargain your life against a living element, and to face the elder is to gamble everything on a single roll, which is exactly why the creatures are worth the danger. Deeper in the wild spaces between the lanes, older and humbler monsters keep their ground. Ancient armored sentinels rest beside still pools, lending their enduring strength to any warrior brave enough to defeat them. Bramble-backed beasts prowl the underbrush, and strange toad-like creatures and packs of little stone crabs hold their tiny territories with stubborn ferocity. None of these carry the grand tragedies of the Darkin or the cosmic menace of the void. They are simply the wildlife of a dangerous land, the ordinary predators and guardians that were living in those groves and rivers long before any champion arrived to fight over them, and they remind every warrior who ventures off the beaten path that in Runeterra even the quiet corners have teeth. For all the deliberate monsters in Runeterra, the ones summoned or built or ascended on purpose, a great many were created entirely by accident, thrown off as side effects of magic doing what magic does. Corruption is the most common cause. Dark power spilled into the world tends to reshape whatever it touches, and the results are rarely kind. The black mist of the Shadow Isles is the clearest example, a corrupting fog that turns the noble into wraiths, twists gentle nature spirits into gnarled horrors, and warps even the mighty imperial dragons of Camavor into undead things when they wander too close. None of those creatures chose their fate. They were caught in the wake of a catastrophe and remade against their will, monsters born not of intent but of proximity to a wound in the world. That same principle can run in the opposite direction, and the proof of it came from the very disaster that created the Shadow Isles. When the Queen of Camavor, Isolde, was still alive, she sewed a doll with extraordinary care, pouring her love and skill into every stitch. Long after her death, when the death magic of the ruination rolled outward and ruined nearly everything it touched, A small fragment of that same magic did something different to the doll. Instead of ruining it, the power hallowed it, and the doll woke up. Gwen, as she came to be, is a living creature spun from Isolde's love and a shard of gentle magic, the bright opposite of the black mist that was born in the same moment. She carries her maker's enchanted scissors and a mist of her own, a hallowed fog that heals and protects rather than corrupts, and she has turned her whole strange existence toward cutting away the very corruption that gave her life. Gwen is the single most hopeful thing to come out of the ruination, a reminder that the same magic capable of drowning a paradise can, on the rarest occasion, stitch something loving out of the ruin. The lesson buried in these accidental creatures runs through everything else in this accounting. Runeterra is a world so saturated with power that its magic constantly overflows its intended purpose, and whatever that overflow touches, it transforms. Most of the time, the transformation is a horror, a person hollowed into a beast, a spirit twisted into a demon, a paradise remade into a graveyard. Once in a great while, it produces a guardian instead. What decides the outcome is rarely the magic itself, and almost always the heart that the magic finds waiting for it. A soul full of grief becomes a ruined king. A soul full of hunger becomes a hound of 100 bites. A soul stitched together out of love becomes a small, brave creature carrying scissors against the dark. The magic only ever answers the question of what was already there, and in a world this deep in wonder, that question is being asked of someone or something almost all the time. For most of Runeterra's history, these monsters were scattered threats, each one contained in its own corner, each one a local nightmare that the nearby people learned to survive. What makes the present age so dangerous is that many of those old containments are failing at once, and the horrors that were sealed, buried, or held at bay are stirring together. The most alarming movement is in the void. For ages the void could only leak through cracks, but now it has a mind guiding it, because Belveth has been born, and she is patient, brilliant, and certain of victory. She intends to consume all of Runeterra and remake it as her lavender sea, and before she does that, she means to destroy the ancient masters of the void themselves. Her prophet Malzahar keeps opening rifts. Small void creatures keep seeping into places they never reached before. And the void huntress Kaisar now carries an impossible task handed to her by the Empress herself, to seek out those ancient masters and find some way to end them. Those ancient masters are the Watchers, still frozen beneath the Freljord, and their prison is not eternal. Lysandra has guarded the true ice for centuries precisely because she knows it can crack, and every generation the risk grows that some fool will chip away at the wrong glacier, or that the Watchers will gather enough strength to break their bonds from within. Should they ever wake, the frozen north would be only the first thing to fall. The horror of the current age is that the void is pushing from below through Belveth, while the Watchers strain from within their ice. Two ends of the same ancient hunger closing on the living world at the same time, and the only people who understand the full shape of the danger are an immortal witch who caused it, and a void-touched hunter who may not survive her mission. The Darkin, too, are loose again after millennia of silence. Their weapons have been surfacing one after another, drawn up out of tombs and battlefields by the greedy and the desperate, and their wielders have been claimed one by one. Aatrox walks free and hungers for the end of everything. Varus struggles inside his shared body. Rast wrestles Cain for control. Naafiri hunts as a pack across the desert, and a further Darkin, Zaun, has emerged to turn his blade against his own kind. The old prophecy warns that if the 5 great Darkin ever reunite, they will bring ruin to the whole world, and more of their prisons open with every passing year. Worst of all, The blood priestess Solani has stirred again. Her bloodletters were recovered when the shadow assassin Cain attacked a temple in search of a second Darkin weapon. And in the ruin of that raid, a grieving young prodigy took up the blades and was swallowed whole, becoming Solani's new vessel. Awake once more, she has reached out across the world toward her sleeping brethren, trying to bind them back into the single obedient will she craved so long ago. The fallen are now splitting into two warring dreams, one led by Aatrox toward the annihilation of everything that exists, the other gathered under Zolani toward the forced unity of all things beneath her control. And neither dream leaves any room for the living. Complicating everything, Shurima itself has risen from the sands after its long burial. Its emperor and its noble ascended awake once more, which means the Darkin's former masters and former brothers now walk the world again alongside the monsters they helped create, a reunion no one can predict the shape of. The Shadow Isles have grown restless as well. The black mist that was once bound to a single drowned archipelago has learned to reach further, rolling out across the water to touch the mainland. And Viego's grief-driven madness has pushed his corruption harder than it has pressed in generations. Bands of the living have taken up arms against the tide. Warriors who hunt the mist and try to reclaim the souls it steals, and gentler creatures like the hallowed doll Gwen fight beside them, cutting at the corruption with borrowed light. These hunters call themselves the Sentinels of Light, an old order revived to stand against the ruined king, and they carry relic weapons capable of tearing souls free from the black mist and even wounding Viego himself. It was their long campaign that finally cornered the ruined king, cost him the reunion he had murdered a whole paradise to reach, and left him restrained for a time. Though no one believes a grief that vast can be held forever. Meanwhile, the ancient demons stir in their own slow way, the reassembling terror of fiddlesticks gathering its scattered pieces, the lesser Azakana multiplying in the thin places of Ionia, and the great old spirits of pain and nightmare and greed, finding no shortage of feeling to feed upon in a world braced for so many disasters at once. The monsters of Runeterra have always been out there. What has changed is that so many of them are moving now, at the same time, and the walls that once kept them apart are thinner than they have ever been. One family of monsters is easy to overlook, because it does not roar or scheme or drown kingdoms. It simply grows. In the deep jungles of Runeterra, where the wild has never been tamed, the plants themselves can be predators. And the oldest and most dangerous of them wears the shape of a woman made of thorns. Zyra belongs to a forgotten age, when monstrous flora ruled the world, long before the age of humans, and she survived the intervening eons as a dormant seed, waiting in the dark soil of the great jungle. When she finally woke, she rose as the rise of thorns, a being woven entirely of vines, petals, and hooked barbs, beautiful in the way a carnivorous flower is beautiful, and utterly without mercy. Zyra sees every warm-blooded creature, humans included, as nothing more than prey and fertilizer, food to be strangled by her creeping plants and fed back into the soil that sustains her. She feels no loyalty and no cruelty either. Only the endless vegetable drive to spread her seeds and consume whatever moves. A predator so old and so alien that reasoning with her is like reasoning with a spreading weed. The green is not all hunger, though, and it produced a gentle counterpart to Zyra's thorns. Ivern was once a brutal Freljordian warrior who marched into the sacred forests of Ionia in search of power, cutting down everything in his path until he reached a holy grove and struck down the ancient tree spirit at its heart. In the instant of that killing, the dying spirit poured its memories and its understanding into him, and Ivern was flooded all at once with the pain of every living thing he had ever harmed. The remorse remade him. He became the Green Father, a kindly tree being who now wanders the forests, nurturing every creature he meets, tending saplings and healing wounds, spending his long second life undoing the kind of harm he once dealt so freely. Zyra and Ivern together frame the whole strange truth of the wild green. The same forests that grow a merciless thorn woman who farms people for soil can also grow a gentle giant who weeps over a trampled flower, and both of them are, in their way, the jungle wearing a face. When you lay all of these creatures side by side, a strange kind of order appears in the chaos, because the monsters of Runeterra are not random. They fall into families, and each family tells you something about the world that made it. The void creatures are hunger in its purest form, the ancient emptiness that wants to erase everything reality added to it. From the mindless bulk of Cho'Gath to the calculating cruelty of Belveth. The Darkin are heroism gone rotten, god warriors who saved the world once and then, hollowed out by trauma and abandoned by history, turned all that power toward ending it. The demons are emotion given teeth, immortal spirits of fear and pain and greed that can never be killed because people will always feel. The Shadow Isles are grief that would not let go, an entire kingdom drowned by one man's refusal to accept a death. And the made monsters are ambition without conscience, the horrors that appear whenever someone decides that a person, living or dead, is just material for a better weapon. Trace these families back far enough, and they start to converge. Which is the deepest truth of Runeterra's monsters. Two great sources produced most of them. The first is the son of ancient Shurima, the ascension that raised mortals into god warriors, because that same golden light made the noble ascended and the Darkin both, and even the captive star dragon whose stolen knowledge powered the ritual belongs to that thread. The second is the spirit realm, the wild reservoir of living magic that gave rise to the vastaya, to the demons that feed on feeling, to the gentle forest spirits, and to death itself walking as kindred. And binding it all together is one catastrophe at the bottom of everything, the day Icathia tore open the void. That single wound broke the Ascended into the Darkin. It seeded the Watcher's long patience beneath the ice, it scattered the refugees who would become the vastaya, and it set loose the hunger that presses on the world to this hour. The monsters of Runeterra are not a random menagerie. They are the fallout of a handful of ancient disasters, still radiating outward, still reshaping everything they touch. Around those great families drift all the others, and they round out the picture. The dragons soar above it, ancient and proud, some of them noble and some of them ruined, a reminder that not every giant beast is a villain. The stone guardians stand watch over forgotten purposes, monstrous only in scale. The sea holds its drowned titans and its serpent goddess, guarding a whole hidden kingdom of terror behind miles of dark water. The frozen north keeps the world's oldest prisons sealed beneath the ice, alongside beasts so ancient the surface has forgotten them. The spirits of death and dream walk the thin places where magic pools too deep. And scattered everywhere are the creatures that only look like monsters. The beast peoples and the hallowed doll and the kind-hearted experiment, paying for a confusion the world refuses to correct. The thread that runs through every one of them is the one worth carrying away. In Runeterra, a monster is almost never just a shape. The true horrors are defined by hunger and by harm, by the drive to consume or corrupt or destroy. And that drive hides behind beautiful faces as often as it looms behind fangs. A grieving king in fine robes drowned a paradise. A charming merchant of the rivers is a demon of gluttony. The oldest torturer in the world appears as a lovely woman. Meanwhile, a minotaur protects the helpless. A slime creature chooses kindness, and a doll sewn from love takes up scissors against the dark. The same magic that saturates this world can make a guardian or a nightmare out of nearly anything, and what decides the outcome is rarely the power itself. It is the heart the power finds waiting. That is why Runeterra breeds so many monsters and will keep breeding them for as long as its stories are told. It is a world built on the bones of dead gods and broken empires, soaked in magic that constantly overflows whatever it was meant to do, and every disaster leaves behind survivors reshaped into something new. Some of them become the horrors that haunt the dark. A rare few become the things that stand against the horrors. Most of them never asked for either. They were simply standing in the wrong place when the world's deep power came looking for a shape to take, and the world went on turning around them, indifferent and beautiful and endlessly, quietly hungry. These are the monsters of Runeterra, every family of them. The hungers and the revenants and the fallen gods, and now you know where each of them came from, what each of them wants, and why in a world this full of wonder, the dark has always had so many things living in it.